Hello and welcome, everyone. You're listening to My Strategy. My name is John M. Hawkins, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today on this Saturday. I'm really glad you could join us. My Strategy episodes are live, and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we're going to be talking about Respectfully, I Disagree with You. In this episode, we're talking about disagreeing with another person, disagreeing with somebody more powerful, somebody with different religious or political differences. And also we're going to talk about some strategies you can use to disagree respectfully. Well, happy to be here today. Saturday is the day I choose to reflect on my strategy. Show's all about personal development. So keep in mind that any day is a great day to assess your strategy. Our show is growing. We're now available on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker. So you can go there and listen to any of our past episodes, and you'll find this episode there later in the week. You can find me on most social media platforms. Find me at Hawkins John on Twitter, or go to my website at johnmhawkins.com. And just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals, because the best laid plans don't always work. This week I'm looking for stories on disagreement. Do you have any good examples? Perhaps a tip or a trick that you use? If you have that, send it to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Or if you just send an email saying hi, you'll be entered into our weekly giveaway. So weekly we draw names and give away a prize package to the lucky winner. Well, respectfully, I disagree with you. Today we're going to be talking about ways that you can disagree with someone respectfully, keeping in mind we can't really agree on everything. We all have our own thoughts and opinions. We're then going to talk about some very tough subjects like religion, politics. How do people who disagree on those topics find some sort of common ground? Then talk a little bit about how you disagree with somebody more powerful than you, what the experts say. Be realistic about the risks of speaking your mind, especially if it's somebody who's a superior, a boss, somebody who has control in some respects over what you do either at work or in your personal life. And talk about how to disagree in English. I thought this would be fun. There's a little lesson out there of teaching people the words they should be using to disagree in English. As you can imagine, there's different ways to disagree with one another depending on the culture. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Respectfully, I disagree with you. I've got an article here by Kat Bugard. It says, disagreements are inevitable. Use these tips to make them productive instead of petty. Kat says in her article, what a world it would be if we all agreed on absolutely everything. But as you already know, that's not a reality. We all have our thoughts, opinions, values, which means disagreement can be pretty common, especially in the workplace. However, there's a big difference between disagreeing and disagreeing respectfully. The first, just disagreeing, will likely cause hurt feelings and only add fuel to an already existing tense fire. But the second, that approach can lead to new ideas and a more productive discussion. Unfortunately, it's all too easy to get wrapped up in your own beliefs. That's a key word here, beliefs. We're going to talk about beliefs in the next segment. But she says, get caught up in your own beliefs that are all common courtesy, and all of our common courtesy goes straight out the window. So as a friendly reminder, she gives us 6 key tips for disagreeing with someone, respectfully, of course. Number 1 is focus on the facts. A strong argument is one that uses facts over and over opinion, but that can be difficult to remember when you're in the middle of a disagreement. What about number 2, which is don't get personal? Speaking of getting personal, it's something you want to avoid at all costs when disagreeing with someone, particularly in a professional setting. Obviously, that means you shouldn't put down the other person or attack his or her ideas or beliefs. That's not at all helpful or productive. What about recognize the good She says, yes, you're disagreeing with this person, but rarely is a suggestion so bad that you can't find a single nugget of wisdom here hidden in there somewhere. Before launching right in with your argument, it's best if you can preface it with something that you like about the person's original suggestion, and then use that as a launching point for your own idea. Before, she says, is remember to listen. There's a trap that's all too easy to fall into when you find yourself in the middle of a disagreement. Rather than active listening, you're just sitting there waiting for your chance to respond. She says, unfortunately, conversations where you're completely tuning the other person out are never productive. So remember to actually listen to the point your conversational partner is presenting. You might be surprised. You could end up finding an even better solution that way. We've done shows on active listening in the past, so if you go back and search for My Strategy Active Listening, there's a whole podcast on it. Number 5, she says, is use I statements. Then she's got a little example here. It says, which of the following statements sounds more harsh and critical? The first option is, you always come up with these big ideas so close to the deadline that you only make things harder for everyone. That's option 1. Option 2, she says, I see where you're coming from, but I'm concerned we might be getting too close to the deadline for major changes. As you can see, just by removing you from your lexicon when you are talking to somebody and disagreeing with them could be beneficial. Know when to move on. Says the cliche catchphrase, agree to disagree, is often repeated for a reason. It can be a handy sentiment to lean on when you need it. Perhaps one of the most important pieces of respectfully disagreeing with someone is knowing when you need to call it quits and just move on. Disagreements are inevitable, but there's definitely a wrong way and a right way to present your own arguments. And I think this agree to disagree, this is our fail-safe, our catch mechanism. When we are in a heated discussion and we know there's not going to be a resolution to it, at some point we have to call a verbal truce of sorts, and saying we agree to disagree could help set up that position. So we're going to hear more about agreeing to disagree, now, especially when it comes time to dealing with some of the topics that we're going to be talking about with regard to religion, in regard to politics. How do you have a conversation or a disagreement with someone when you have different political views, when you have different religious views? There's some research that talks about ways that you can have that conversation, and we're going to be talking about that in the next segment. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about politics and religion and disagreement. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. The show you're listening to is My Strategy. We'd love to get your thoughts, so send us an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Or later in the show, we'll take your call at 866-451-1451. It's 866-451-1451. And if you do send in an email today with either a tip on how to disagree respectfully or a situation that you might have been in where you weren't able to come to an agreement, if you send us that email, you'll be entered into our weekly giveaway. Right before the break, we were talking about ways to disagree with someone respectfully. And we had 6 wonderful tips that we can use in every situation to solve every disagreement. And that's all we need to move on. Just those 6 tips, that's all it takes. But actually, that's not true, because there is more to the story and more to this episode. In this segment, I want to talk about politics and religion. Researchers have found ways to disagree productively. What about with ideological disagreements? What about based on facts? So I've got an article here that's very interesting. It's by Larissa Heifetz, and it's called Researchers Have Found a Way to Disagree Productively About Politics and Religion. She says, in this current political climate, it's easy to find yourself in the midst of a political disagreement that morphs into a religious argument. People's religious affiliation predicts their stance on abortion, immigration, and other controversial topics, and disagreements about these issues can seem intractable. The seemingly futility in arguing about politics and religion may arise partly because people misunderstand the nature of these beliefs. Many people approach an ideological disagreement the same way they would a disagreement about facts. It's a very key point here. How do we approach an ideological disagreement versus a disagreement about facts? If you disagree with someone about when water freezes, facts are convincing. It's easy to think that if you disagree with someone about immigration, facts would be similarly persuasive. This might work if people's ideological beliefs worked in the same way as their factual beliefs, but they don't. She says, as psychologists who focus on religion and moral cognition, she and her colleagues are investigating how people understand that these are 2 separate classes of beliefs. Fact versus opinion. She says, our work suggests that an effective strategy for disagreement involves approaching ideological beliefs as a combination of fact and opinion. This is important. You approach your argument, your disagreement differently based on the subject. She says, identifying a difference. To investigate whether people distinguish between facts and religious beliefs, her colleagues and she examined a database containing more than 520 million words from speeches, novels, newspapers, and other sources. This is fascinating. She said religious statements were typically preceded by the phrase, believe that, rather than think that. I want you to ruminate on that a bit. Believe versus think. Believe versus think. Phrases like, I believe that Jesus turned water into wine were relatively common, whereas the phrase that I think that Jesus turned water into wine were non-existent. I think this is a very important and fascinating point. She says in 4 subsequent experiments, they asked adults to complete sentences. So they had a sentence where it said Zane underscore, so either believes or thinks that Jesus turned water into wine. It said participants were more likely to use believes for religious and political claims and think for factual claims. She said, how often did people use believe to complete these statements? Well, she went out and did her research, and she's got 3 examples here. The first one is Fred and Uriana believe or think that George Washington was the first U.S. president. 27% said believe. The next one was with regard to politics. Sam has come to believe that immigration causes harm to the economy. 50% of the respondents said believe. But what about when it came time to religion? When it came time to religion, the biggest response was Jews believe that the Son of God has not come to earth. 80%. So here we have three separate topics. One of them is fact, one of them has to do with politics, and one of them has to do with religion. And people use different words based on whether they see it as a fact and something that can be proved, something that has a political nature, or something that is religious. She says, taken together, these results suggest that people distinguish between factual beliefs on the one hand and religious and political claims on the other. She said, rather than equating ideologies and facts, people appear to view ideologies as a combination of fact and opinion. In two earlier studies, 5 to 10-year-old children and adults learned about pairs of characters who disagreed with religious, factual, and opinion-based statements. For example, we told participants that one person thought that God could hear prayers while the other didn't, or that two other people disagreed about whether or not blue is the prettiest color. Participants said that only one person could be right nearly every time. They heard a factual disagreement, but they gave this answer less often when they heard a religious disagreement and less often still when they heard an opinion-based disagreement. This result may occur because children and adults think that different types of beliefs provide different information. Participants told us factual claims reveal information about the world. Participants told us that factual claims reveal information about the world, whereas opinions reveal information about the speaker. They also reported that religious claims reveal a moderate amount of information about both the world and the speaker. People who say God exists are ostensibly making a claim about what kinds of beings exist in the world, but not everyone would agree with that claim. So they are also revealing information about themselves. So the question is, if you had proof that other beings existed and could factually prove it, how would that change people's opinion about God? The article goes on to talk a little bit more about scientific evidence shows that, it says when you find yourself in the midst of an ideological disagreement, it can be tempting to correct the other person's facts. They said, don't correct the facts. Here's two examples. Actually, scientific evidence shows that the Earth is more than 4 billion years old and that humans did not evolve from other primates. Actually, recent data shows that immigrants contribute to the economy and commit fewer crimes than native-born Americans. She said, while this type of information alone is insufficient to resolve disagreement, it's addressing the part of the ideological beliefs that is like a fact, and the part where someone is trying to communicate information about the world. A lot more interesting stuff in that article. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about disagreeing with somebody who is more powerful than you. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and the show is called My Strategy. We'd love to get your thoughts. Our studio line's open at 866-451-1451. We'll be taking calls later in the show. Additionally, you can send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Send us an email and you can be entered into our weekly giveaway. Right before the break, we were talking about politics and religion. So now we've talked about disagreeing with someone, disagreeing with their politics, disagreeing with their religion. In this segment, I want to transition a little bit to talking about workplace. My strategy is all about strategy, personal development, and I want to talk a little bit about when you need to disagree with somebody who is more powerful than you are. Got an article here by Amy Gallo called How to Disagree with Someone Who is More Powerful Than You. Your boss proposes a new initiative. You think it won't work. Your senior colleague outlines a project timeline you think is unrealistic. What do you say when you disagree with someone who has more power than you do? How do you decide whether it's worth speaking up? And if you do, what exactly should you say? She says the experts tell you that it's a natural human reaction to shy away from disagreeing with a superior. Our bodies specialize in survival, so we have a natural bias to avoid situations that might harm us, says Joseph Grenny, the co-author of Crucial Conversations and the co-founder of Vital Smarts. The heart of the anxiety is that there will be negative implications, added Holly Weeks, the author of Failure to Communicate. We immediately think, they're not going to like me. They're going to think I'm a pain. Or maybe even I'll get fired. Although it's just plain easier to agree, Weeks said. That's not always the right thing to do. She gives us some ideas on how to disagree with somebody who is more powerful than you are. How many times have you been in a situation when you are dealing with somebody who is more powerful and you don't say anything? The reason we don't is there's lots of risks. She says most people tend to overplay the risk involved in speaking up. Our natural bias is to start by imagining all the things that could go horribly wrong. Granny says, yes, your counterpart might be surprised and a little upset at first, but chances are you're not going to get fired or make a lifelong enemy. And he suggests you first must consider the risk of not speaking up. Because in not speaking up, it could derail a project or you could lose your team's trust. So it says, decide whether to wait. After you've decided that risk, you may decide it's best to hold off on voicing your opinion. And there's good reasons for this, according to the article. Maybe you haven't finished thinking the problem through. The whole discussion was a surprise to you, or you want to get some clearer sense of what the group thinks. This is what Weeks says. And if you think other people are going to disagree, you might want to gather your army first. People can contribute experiences or information to your thinking and all the things that would make the disagreement stronger or more valid. It's a good idea to delay the conversation if you're in a meeting or public space. Discussing the issue in private will make the powerful person feel less threatened. There's a right time and place to bring things up. Offline sometimes is a great place to do it. Great time to do it and place. Identify a shared goal. Before you share your thoughts, think about what the powerful person cares about. It might be the credibility of their team or getting a project done on time, says Gretty. You're more likely to be heard if you can connect your disagreement to a higher purpose. When you don't speak up, don't assume the link will be clear. You'll want to state it overtly, contextualizing your statement so that you're not seen as the disagreeable underling, but as a colleague who is trying to advance a shared goal. The discussion will become more like a chess game than a boxing match. Another thing she says here is asking permission to disagree. This step may sound overly differential, but according to Granny, it's smart to give the powerful person psychological safety and control. You can say something like, I know we seem to be moving towards a first quarter commitment here, and I have reasons to ask, and I have reasons to think that won't work. I'd like to lay out my reasoning. Would that be okay? This gives the person a choice, allowing them to verbally opt in, says Granny, and assuming that they say yes, it will make you feel more comfortable about voicing your disagreement. This is an important one. The article, it says you need to stay calm. You might feel your heart racing or your face turning red, but do whatever you can to remain neutral in your body, in both your words and actions. When your body language communicates reluctance or anxiety, it undercuts the message, Week says. It sends a mixed message, and your counterpart gets to choose what to read. She explains, take deep breaths can help, and speaking more slowly and deliberately. When we feel panicky, we tend to talk louder and faster. You don't want to be mousy or talk in a whisper, but simply slowing the pace and talking in even tones can help the other person down and will do the same for you. Next one is validate the original point. After you've gotten permission, articulate the other person's point of view. What is the idea, opinion, or proposal that you're disagreeing with? Stating that clearly, possibly even better than your counterpart did, lays a strong foundation for the discussion. Next one is don't make judgments. When you move on to expressing your concerns, watch your language carefully. Randy says avoid using any judgmental words, such as short-sighted, foolish, or hasty. This could set off your counterpart. Stay humble. Emphasize that you're offering your opinion, not the gospel truth, says Granny. It may be well-informed, well-researched opinion, but it's still an opinion. And slightly understate your confidence. This all ties into the segment before with religion, where we were talking about facts versus opinion. Acknowledge their authority. Ultimately, the person in power is probably going to make the final decision. So you acknowledge that. You might say, I know you'll make the call here, and this is up to you. That not only shows you know your place, but also reminds them that they have choices. Don't backtrack on your opinion. So there's some principles to remember. Do explain that you have a different opinion and ask if you can voice it. Restate the original point of view or decision so it's clear that you understand it. Speak slowly. Talking in even tones calms you and the other person down. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to politely disagree in English. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. And if you're just joining us, you're listening to My Strategy. My name is John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And this week we're talking about Respectfully, I Disagree with You. This episode we're talking about disagreeing with another person. disagreeing with somebody's religious and political differences. Talked about disagreeing with somebody more powerful than you are, and also putting together some strategies that you can use to respectfully disagree. Keep in mind that we do have our weekly giveaway still going on, so send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Say hi or send your tip or trick for disagreeing with someone. You can be entered into that weekly giveaway. Well, we've covered a lot in this show. Talked about ways to disagree respectfully. Talked about politics and religion. Right before the break, we talked about disagreeing with somebody who is more powerful than you, or a colleague or peer who you deem or see as being more powerful. So I want to have a little fun. We're going to transition a little bit here to an article that I have here called Speak Confident English: How to Disagree Politely in English. And it actually is a lesson on how to disagree in English that was originally published in June of 2016 and was updated in February of 2019. And it has a nice little video that goes along with it. It says, and at work or university with colleagues and friends, in a business meeting or in a discussion with your professor, sometimes it's necessary to disagree or say no. We did a whole podcast on how to say no a couple weeks back, so you can search and find that one if you're interested. It says here, and that is okay. In English-speaking culture, it is important to share your opinions and express your ideas. But how should you do that in English politely? So this article is all about how we can do that politely. There is a note here that says the art of disagreeing with others differs from one culture to another and person to person. And I do think this is very important as you travel around the globe and deal with people who have come from different backgrounds, different parts of the world. There are cultural differences to how we approach business, how we communicate. And it's important that if you are dealing with somebody from a different part of the world or it speaks a different language natively, to really understand how best to effectively communicate with them, especially if you want to maintain your relationship. She says, while this lesson you'll learn the best English phrases you can use to agree in formal and informal situations without offending one, these expressions will also help you learn how to share your opinions. And like many of the other articles that we reviewed, it says one important thing to remember is stay calm. Keep your voice and your body movements calm. That will help you and the other person feel good about the disagreement. The goal is for everyone to walk away from the disagreement happy, or at least not angry. We'll see if we leave being happy. I know I've felt content after being in a contentious disagreement, but I don't know about happy. Unless it went my way, then maybe I was a little bit happy. It says the most polite way to disagree with someone is to use one of these strategies when introducing your disagreement. So her strategies are, number one, show that you understand the other person's opinion. Apologize before introducing your disagreement. Pretend to be in the middle or unsure about your position. So show that you understand the other person's opinion. That means that you need to be active listening. You need to hear what the other person says. Apologize before introducing your disagreement. Shows respect. Shows that you are humble and respect who that person is. Pretend to be in the middle or unsure about your position. That way they can, if they see that you are bringing up a specific position, you're not 100% certain on it, but you're looking for their input to come to a decision. So it says using these strategies helps to soften the disagreement and make your position or argument more effective. So number one, I see what you're saying, but I think. I respect your point, but from my perspective, or in my opinion, I take your point, but that isn't the way I see it. Instead, I think that. True, that's a fair point, but I have to say I disagree. I understand where you're coming from, but there is some truth to what you're saying, but don't you think that? I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with you on. I'm not sure I agree with you on. I don't think you and I have the same opinion on this issue. I'm afraid I disagree. I'm sorry, but I don't agree. I don't see it that way. I'm sorry, but I disagree with you on this. I respectfully disagree. I have a completely different opinion on that. So that's how you can respectfully say it in a professional setting at work. And, as you get into disagreements and different arguments, it's always hard to come up with the right thing to say at the right time. So considering practicing some of these, writing them down, and when you do get into a disagreement, use one of these and see how well it works. It says, in a political disagreement, offer an alternative solution. To effectively argue for your position or opinion, it's best to finish your disagreement by offering an alternative or a suggestion. This is a solution-focused argument and can also soften the disagreement. She says, use, instead, I think we should or could. My suggestion would be to. An alternative solution might be, I would recommend that we. How about we? What do you think about? If you asked me, I think we should. Right? So that's how you might approach that in a political situation. Now, the next one is kind of fun because when you're with your buddies or friends, you're not going to be using the formal. So what you can say are things like, no way. You must be joking. You can't be serious. I totally disagree. I don't think so. But what if you talk and neither of you can agree with each other? You will never see eye to eye. The phrase they say you should always defer to is, let's just agree to disagree. It's got some interesting tips here, and I think that, going through these from an English-speaking perspective, it's always hard when you're in the middle of a debate to come up with the right sentence to say. But if you have a few of those in your back pocket and practiced, it might be a little easier. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about developing your strategy. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Today we're talking about Respectfully, I Disagree. Right before the break, we were going through an English lesson on how to politely disagree in English. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit about developing your strategy. You know, as you go through building a strategy, it's important to think about this in a systematic way, where we are aware that there's some vision or goal, something that we want to achieve, but we need to figure out what it is we're going to do or what is not working. So we then need to assess and analyze, assess the situation, do some analysis to figure out what are the steps that we can take. You then strategize and plan, put together your course of actions so that you can determine which ones are going to get you to your goal, implement your plan, and then support and evaluate to help you accomplish it. So today we're talking about disagreement. Where are you with respect to being able to enter a conversation and leave the conversation respectfully disagreeing with someone? How are you when it comes time to discussing politics, religion, discussing disagreements with somebody who is a superior or has more authority or power than you? If you are perfect in all of those areas, you get to check all the boxes and you don't need to work on developing a strategy. But if you were not able to check off all the boxes, you might have some work to do. I got 10 tips here that we can review to help us figure out strategies that we could implement. An article here by Susan Cross, which talks about many of the things we've talked about in the show today: preferred candidates, managers, bosses, people we don't agree with. She says in a recent study, Michigan State University's Robert Lupton and Georgia State University's Judge Thornton examined the ways individuals interact over social networks and how they shared different views. She says disagreement, they argue, is the extent to which you are exposed to people with whom you and others come to an opposite side of social issues. You are the outlier compared to them. Diversity, by contrast, is the extent to which your social network allows there to be a variety of opinions expressed and respected. Everyone in your social network may be in complete agreement that candidate X was best suited for the position. You, however, believe that candidate Y. And in a diverse social network, there are plenty of X's and Y's, and maybe even some Z's. Lupton and Thornton's study was interested in predicting who would be the most likely to vote based on whether their network were characterized by disagreement or diversity. As it turned out, there was enough disagreement present in a network. People became less likely to vote. Diversity of opinion had no effect on voting behavior. It's only if you feel that you're alone in your opposition to those you interact with that you'll opt out of the political process. She says, according to this finding, perhaps people believe their opinion counts less when they're in opposition to the opinions of those they care about. And so they disengage. Being part of a network of diverse opinions doesn't seem to have that suppressive effect. So she talks about some findings as it relates to understanding how we can get along with those people whose beliefs differ from our own. So as we're thinking about our strategy, let's think about these points. Appreciate the value of diversity. When you and those in your network feel compelled to arrive at the same viewpoint, it will be painfully difficult for you to experience a division between you and anyone else. So as we gain from sharing opinions, and in the process feel more invested in society at large. Number 2, listen to the other side with an open mind. Diversity of opinion means that just recognizing that you can learn from each other is a sign of a healthy relationship with those you care about. Think before you voice your own opinion. Will you be able to justify it? A poorly conceived argument will only place you on the defensive when you realize its weaknesses. Don't set yourself up for being shut down. It will only contribute to the bad feelings. Keep your cool, even when the conversation gets hot. Being able to appreciate diversity means that you don't go off the deep end when someone expresses a dissenting opinion. If you let your emotions get in the way of your logic, you'll not only lose the argument, but further contribute to the animosity in the room. Try to find a common ground on which you can agree. It may seem impossible at the time to acknowledge the validity of someone else's argument, but adults should be able to appreciate the gray between the black and white of your viewpoints. Don't drag others into the debate. Keep things focused on you and whoever you're having the disagreement with. Try to form coalitions or sides will only escalate bad feelings. Avoid personal insults. It probably goes without saying that you should keep your communication respectful. There's no reason to start assaulting someone else's personal qualities because you have different views. This is my favorite. Keep a sense of humor. Even when serious differences of opinion are being discussed, try to find ways to maintain your perspective. See if there are humorous aspects in your diversity of opinion and allow those to balance out the negative. Try to change the person's mind, but don't persist if it's not working. Once you get past a certain point, nothing you say will matter. It's best to move on and talk about your areas of shared interest and views. Or perhaps we agree to disagree, which is our fail-safe. And number 10, reinforce the positive feelings that you have for each other despite your differences. If your relationship is long and strong enough, this too shall pass. Events external to you and those with whom you differ eventually alter one or both of your opinions. Continue to maintain an air of openness and mutual respect will allow you to survive the changing political and social climate. Fulfillment of your relationships with those you care about depends on being able to communicate across the divides that sometimes come between us. She says these tips should help you keep the communication lines open. Well, as we start to think about our strategy, we want to think about diversity. We want to think about, is this argument worth having, especially if it is somebody who is very close to us. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about putting your strategy in place. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Today we're talking about respectfully, I disagree with you. This episode we're talking about disagreeing with another person, disagreeing with somebody more powerful than you, handling religious and political differences, and also putting some strategies out there and courses of actions that we can use to respectfully disagree. Well, in case you missed this broadcast, you can listen on iHeartRadio, Apple, iTunes. And if you'd like to have something covered in the show, send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Or give us a call at 844-MY-STRATEGY. The number again is 1-844-MY-STRATEGY. Well, today we've been talking about quite a bit of disagreement when it comes time to personal opinions, beliefs, and I think at the end of the day, we need to realize that we're not going to agree on everything. We all have our own thoughts, our own opinions, our own values. We come from different backgrounds. And all of that equates to the fact that disagreements are very common. Disagreements happen every day. And I think that we need to be equipped to be able to deal with those. Because in dealing with them, we can grow and strengthen our relationships. By ignoring them, by not addressing them, there can also be repercussions as a result of not doing anything. So I think it's important that we all come up with our own way to handle disagreements. And ignoring a disagreement is not an appropriate way to handle it, from my personal opinion. We then talked a little bit about politics and religion. You know, researchers are studying politics and religion, and they found ways to disagree productively. What about ideological disagreements and facts-based arguments? We talked a little bit about that. We learned that factual claims reveal information about the world and opinions about the speaker. It was also interesting to note that when somebody disagreed with a political statement or a fact, that they used different terminology. They used think when it came time to disagreeing with a fact or not knowing if it was true, and they used believe if it had to do with religion or politics. We then learned how to disagree with somebody more powerful, be realistic about the risks. We talked a little bit about how we need to respect them, ask for their permission. I think there were some good takeaways there that I will definitely use. And talked a little bit about ways that we can disagree in English. And I thought this was fun because are some phrases that we can use and put them in our back pocket and perhaps even practice so that when we do get into a situation where we're having a disagreement, we can use those, see how they work. And it all comes down to trying to develop your strategy. Think about what it is that you want to accomplish. What are your goals? And if you're in a bad habit, breaking those habits is difficult. But in order for us to break those habits, we need to be aware of patterns. We need to figure out exactly what is the incorrect habit or action that we're doing and replace it with a better habit or action, which means that we need to consciously prioritize and commit to our goals or intentions. All of this can help increase our chance to realize that goal or intention. And finally, if we're having troubles trying to make all of this happen, try find a mentor, a coach, or somebody who can help you through it, because it is not easy to disagree and to come out amicably. But if you have somebody who has experience, it can help you in the long run. Well, you've been listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. It's a pleasure to be with you here today, and we will see you next time.